Today, we're going to talk about operations of functions. So essentially, we're going to have two different functions, and we're going to be performing an operation. That operation might include a number, or it may include a letter. So when it has a number, you're actually going to be plugging that number in like we did previously for evaluation of functions, and then doing the operation. If it has a letter, we'll talk about that in a moment. So here we have g plus h of the number 7. So we're going to be plugging the 7 into both equations, like so. So -3 times 7 is -21. So that is when we plug it into the first one. And then we're going to be plugging it into the second one. So we're going to take 3 times 7 and we'll subtract 4. So you can do that whole thing in your calculator or do PEMDAS, which is 21 take away 4, which is 17. Since it has this plus sign in the middle, when you get your answer from equation 1 and equation 2, you're simply going to add the two answers together. A -21 plus a -17 is a -4. For the second example, we have the letter A. So what that means is we're going to be performing this operation, but there's no numbers to plug in. So we're simply going to be adding our equations together. Rather our expressions without the equal signs. So we'll look for any like terms. We have an invisible 1 over here. So 1 minus 2 is -1a. And a -3 and a -3 is a -6. So your final answer is just going to be an expression if there's a letter. For this one over here, we have a subtraction sign between the G and the F, and we have a 1. So we're going to be plugging the 1 into both equations, and then at the end, we'll subtract our two answers. So first, we'll plug the 1 into our top equation. Let's use parentheses when we plug it in, especially when it's a negative. We want to be careful of that. 1 to the 3rd power is just 1. Because 1 times 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 plus 1 is 2. Then we'll take our second equation, or expression, and we'll plug in our 1 for n in parentheses. 3 times 1 is 3, and 3 minus 2 is 1. This time, since it has a minus, we'll bring down a minus between our two answers. And we're left with a +1. So when you have a number, you plug it in and do the operation that's shown. When you have a letter, you simply write your two equations down and do the operation that's in between. In this case, when it's a minus, you want to be really careful because you're subtracting this whole second equation. So we want to put the second equation or second expression in parentheses to make sure that we know we're changing the sign on both of these or distributing the negative. So previously, when we worked with complex numbers, when we had a minus in between, we changed it to positive, and then we changed the sign on the two that followed. So this will become a positive, and this will become a negative. We'll drop our 2a minus 5 down exactly as is, and we'll look for any like terms. I don't care what order you put these terms in, so we'll drop the 2a down, -5 and -4 is -9, and we'll add our a3 at the end. The reason these two cannot be combined, since students have asked me that before, is because one has a 3 and one just simply has an a. This little dot between the H and the G indicates multiplication. So we're going to be plugging our 3 in for both equations. We'll use parentheses when we plug in. And then when we get our 2 final answers, that's where we will be multiplying our final 2 answers because of the dot. This one's a little bit easier than the one on the left. This one you have to do 3 to the 3rd power, which is 27. 3 squared is 9. And then I forgot to plug it here in at the end. That should be 2 times 3, which is 6. 2 times 9 is 18. So we'll be adding these 3 numbers together first before multiplying by what we get over here. You could always do this whole thing in your calculator as well if you prefer. So that's going to be 12 plus 27 is 39. And then since we're multiplying it times 0, anything times 0 is just 0. So we didn't really need to add all that together, but just so we know how to do it. Once again, performing the operation that's in between the 2 letters. And when you have that number, plugging it in first. This one has a letter, but no number. So that means we're going to be taking our 2 equations side by side and multiplying them. Since we're doing multiplication, we want to put these in parentheses because we're multiplying this whole thing by this whole thing. We're going to be doing our distributive property or our FOIL. So we have a negative 1n times 3n is negative 3n squared. Because when we multiply exponents or letters that have these invisible ones by them, we add the exponents. Negative 1n times 5 is negative 5n. We'll then distribute this 5. So 5 times 3 is 15, and this one has an n. And 5 times 5 is 25. We'll check for like terms at the end, which we have. And we'll combine those, which 15 minus 5 is 10. And we can't combine these two because one has a squared and one does not. So you're going to get a bit longer answer when you have a variable over here because there's no number to plug in. These ones on the bottom are my favorite. We'll plug in this number, and then when the variables are stacked like this, we're thinking division. So we're going to plug our negative 4 into our top equation for both x's. Making sure that's in parentheses, we'll get a 16 and a positive 12 when we multiply, which is 28. The bottom one, we'll take that negative 4 and plug it into the bottom expression. 4 times negative 4 is negative 16, plus 1 is negative 15. Since it has this division bar, we'll divide our final answers. Now the G is on the top, so we're going to take our first answer that we got when we plugged into G on the top, and our second answer that we plugged into H on the bottom. You can leave it like this, or you can make it a decimal. You could try to reduce if the numbers divide by a common number, but since they don't, I'm going to leave it there. Now this one you might notice only has the T. So what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and put your top equation on top, which is 3t plus 3, and your bottom equation, which is G, on the bottom. So typically this is where we would stop. You want to kind of check and see if either of these equations can be factored. We haven't really learned about this yet, but this is a preview into the next chapter. So you can leave your equation like this. This is just a little bit of a preview. is you can look for a GCF. So since these both divide by 3, you could factor out a 3, and you would be left with t plus 1 on the top. And then on the bottom, these both divide by t, and they both have at least 2. There's 3 and 2. There's 2 or 3 t's on top, 2 t's on bottom. So there's 1 extra t on the top. These would cancel, leaving you with -2. And then the t squared would go on the outside. So this is just a little preview into the next unit, is how to factor down our expression. For this particular exam, if you leave your answer like this, I will take it. And that's probably how I'll show it in class. But this would be good if you're trying to work on your factoring a little bit as well. The last one we're going to do on our operations and composition of function is these open circle. So it's not a multiplication, it actually is a composition sign. So what you do is you plug in this -3 into the F equation first. So whatever letter is second, you're going to do that expression first, which is a little backwards than the other ones. Do that in your calculator or using PEMDAS, and you'll get 6 plus 4, which is 10. Whatever answer you get for this, you're going to take it into the top equation. Because when we found f of -3, f of -3 is now replaced with 10. So we're being asked to find what is g of 10. So we're taking that 10 for our second step, and we're plugging it in to our first equation for n, which is 20 minus 3 is 17. So this is how you do composition of functions and operations. This particular example is called composition. The ones towards the top are called operations. Just remember, with composition, with the open circle, plug the -3 or whatever number is there, plug that into the bottom equation first. Once you find that, you can take the 10 or the answer and plug it into the top because it's the first letter. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to let me know.